Our memories are everything. They hold our stories, they hold our people, and the moments that we never want to forget. So, when forgetfulness creeps in during perimenopause and menopause, really, so does the worry. And in those quiet moments, we ask ourselves, is this normal or is it something a little bit more? What can I do? It's not just memory loss, it's the moments of brain fog, the confusion, the shifts in our moods that has so many women worried. Today, we are joined by Professor Ralph Martins, one of the world's leading experts on aging and Alzheimer's disease, to help us sort the fact from the fear. So, we're asking what's normal, what's not, and what can we actually do to protect our memories and our peace of mind. So, Professor Ralph Martins, thank you so much for joining us. As you can see, I've got some big questions for you today.
Thank you, Shelley. It's a real pleasure to be here.
No, we're calling
Thank
you a
you.
world-leading Alzheimer's researcher, but really you are the voice of Alzheimer's in the world. You've got, I guess, associates across the globe all working in the same direction that you are to explain what this form of dementia is. So can we start with, I guess, what is Alzheimer's in compared to just dementia in general?
Yes, Alzheimer's is basically a condition where one loses their minds, their ability to function, their cognitive function declines over a period of time. But it's distinguished from other forms of dementia. Dementia means loss of mind, by the fact that there's a particular cause of Alzheimer's disease. And what we see is in the brains of people who die from Alzheimer's, a buildup of a very sticky substance that we call amyloid. And this was found in 1907. It was described by a very famous psychiatrist, Alois Alzheimer, that gets the disease gets a name from him. He described it in a 51-year-old woman when she died from Alzheimer's. And today we know that that person died really from what we call young onset dementia, as opposed to the more older forms that we see, but the same features. You get a buildup of this very toxic substance called amyloid in the brain. And there's another type of amyloid that probably we may not have a chance to talk about. They call tau. It's present inside neurons, and it really results in a dementia. So the amyloid is the trigger, leading to the tau being changed in a very abnormal manner that results in dementia. So it's a period of like 20 years of this whole process takes to happen. And I
Okay,
was
so
very fortunate that I started my career in 1984, 41 years ago, with a very prominent pathologist who's like Alzheimer's, Dr. Alzheimer's, Professor Colin Masters, who's now in Melbourne. And he used to tell me, "Don't waste your time. We all we do is we look at people. We say they got Alzheimer's. We're not sure. Only when they're dead, we look at their brains and we say they've got Alzheimer's."
mhm.
That was a challenge for me, but it's all changed so much. And Professor Masters is still doing some exciting work at the Florey Institute.
So in the 80s, you had to wait until someone had passed away before you could examine the brain and see this build-up of amyloid. Is that right?
That's correct. And so when you talk about a clinical diagnosis, no matter how good the clinician is, even today, they get it 70% right. That means there are as many as 30% that are misdiagnosed because there are other conditions, and you mentioned early in the piece about dementia that basically overlap. So
Mhm.
it's very hard to say, that someone's got dementia, but to say whether it's definitely Alzheimer's or maybe it's vascular dementia or frontotemporal dementia or other types of dementia. So that's the big issue. But now that's changed in a major way. And the reason why it's changed is that technology has moved and we can now visualize amyloid in the brain during life. And this is a work that's been happening in partnership between my team in Western Australia at Either County University and ARA, Alzheimer's Research Australia, and teams in Melbourne, Florey, the Austin, and the CSRO throughout the country. And it was a real mammoth effort bringing all these scientists and clinicians and researchers together for one common cause. Can we diagnose Alzheimer's early? Does lifestyle matter?
Mhm.
And both have turned out to be huge, huge advantage. So Australia is at the forefront because of this powerful partnership where we've put aside egos and we focus on the problem at hand and we stand out. The US has a major program like this. Ours is called Australian Imaging and Lifestyle.
Mhm.
study for Alzheimer's. In the US, they've called ADNI, Alzheimer's in Neuroimaging. They spend $60 million a year. We spend $3 to $4 million a year for the
Oh,
same number of participants. So we're doing it very tough, but the quality of work that's come out has been huge. And one of the first things we showed in around 2004, 2005, just after this whole program started, was that you can visualize amyloid in the brain in people who don't have memory problems, people like you and me, as much as not so much you, more me, people in their 60s and older, who have no sign of memory problem, that the amyloid is building up. And that alerted us to the fact that you can see this amyloid building up 20 years, at least 20 years before the onset of any symptoms.
we've got some serious brains, pardon the pun, working on being able to diagnose early. So you're saying the signs of this amyloid building up in the brain can now be identified 20 years before any of that sort of brain fog or
Exactly,
disorientation or memory lapses. What is the
exactly.
difference, I suppose? I mean, again, at my age, almost hitting 50, these things are starting to happen, and we all say, oh, it's perimenopause, this too shall pass. But the worry is there. And I think dementia and Alzheimer's, particularly, I think worries women more than cancer, perhaps now in our minds, as something we just can't, as you say, see, diagnose, or do anything about.
Exactly. But like I said, it's changing so much, and I can talk some more about how diagnosis is really moving forward beyond just taking pictures of the brain, which are quite expensive, and we're not in a position throughout the country to offer that to everybody. Uh, so that's been a limiting factor. It's been great for clinical trials,
Mhm,
but for actual looking at treatments and early diagnosis, we need something better, and that's been my life's work. I've been trying to develop a blood test for Alzheimer's
mhm,
for the last 25 years when everyone told me it was a waste of time, dream on. And now in 2025, these blood tests are a reality. And so we are very close to now developing our own blood test in Australia, but it's already out there in the United States. So you can
mhm.
go to your doctor and they send the blood test to the United States, for example, and they give you a result back uh, just from a blood test. So that's changed the way in which we now can look at Alzheimer's, and it'll become the norm. So everybody who's concerned potentially could go and get a blood test that would have be as accurate as taking a picture of the brain.
This is phenomenal news. Is this something you can just go to a GP and ask for? Do you need to have a history or a family history of Alzheimer's to be able to request a blood test?
So that's that's a very important question that you ask. At this stage, a history and maybe early symptoms would be a sign. But I think in the future, it'll be people who are concerned, people in their 40s, because you know the disease expresses itself clinically in the 60s and 70s,
Mhm,
but it's starting in the 40s, late 40s, or even maybe early in the 50s. So the future will be to go big, like how we go for a cholesterol blood test.
mhm.
You know, is it levels higher? No, then relax. If it is high, then maybe they may want to confirm it with a brain imaging test, or look at treatments. And the good news, Shelley, is treatments are around the corner.
Mhm.
Well, there's one already starting in Australia as we speak. That's what we call disease modifying treatments. I keep going back to Professor Colin Masters because he gave me my first job 41 years ago. I just graduated from university. I was trained as a biochemist, so I tried to understand the mechanism of diseases. He was a pathologist looking at brains under the microscope. So it was a great collaboration. But in his lab that he led, we identified what was building up in these, what we call plaques. Uh, so it's in Perth, in Western Australia. The amyloid protein was identified, not in the United States, in these plaques. And I believe this man will get here, and he more than deserves it, the Nobel Prize, because now, as a result of that discovery, 41 years later, there are disease-modifying treatments in place. So that's what's so exciting about it. So you can get rid of that amyloid. Is it the full story? We still don't know, but it's definitely a major first step forward.
This is incredible information, and something that I don't think the general population is
Exactly.
aware of yet is the amount of work that's being done here in Australia, and what you and Professor Masters have been able to do with, as you say, brains and voices all over the world to come up with solutions for us. When you're talking about the fact that you won't see any signs or symptoms, perhaps for 20 years after the disease has taken place, we're very much about proactive medicine here. We're very much about getting on the front foot and looking after our own health. Can you explain the differences, I suppose, between what those signs and symptoms might be for Alzheimer's compared to menopause and just normal brain fog or memory lapse? Is there a remarked difference between the feelings that we would have?
So I think you've got to recognize that Alzheimer's disease it's a progressive, and I'm using the technical term, neurodegenerative disease where the brain starts to die.
Mhm,
So the main difference is that it's people who have these symptoms, they'll be getting worse
mhm,
and worse, as opposed to people with brain fog, during perimenopause. Having said that, we need to be careful. We do know that hormones are very important in regulating the buildup of this amyloid in the brain.
mhm,
And the hormones that we used to be calling sex hormones, like estrogen and testosterone, have huge amount of effects all over the body, and particularly the brain. And so one of the things that I think, and it may not be the only thing, there'll be other factors that put women at higher risk, is during menopause, there's a rapid drop in estrogen. And in men, we have andropause, so men are not immune, but it's much more gradual. But under both conditions, when these hormones go down, amyloid levels go up,
mhm,
start building up. So there is a basis for the condition in some women when this it doesn't get treated in some form. It could be counterbalanced with diet, with exercise, and so people sort of stabilize. But in other cases, this may be uh, on that road to having amyloid build up. So I guess if someone is genuinely worried, the first point of call is obviously their GP. But
mhm,
I guess they're really worried about their memory because they're repeatedly forgetting stuff.
mhm.
Then they should insist on being referred to a memory clinic. And we are having memory clinics now in every city in Australia. And this is really the great work of another major Alzheimer researcher who's brought together a team of national researchers, Professor Chris Rowe, from the Florey, but he's also mainly at the Austin Hospital, where the federal government funded the program. Unfortunately, it's not being continued to be funded, which we find a bit unfortunate, to set up memory clinics in every major city so that people who are concerned about their memory can come and get an assessment. And also, we have what we call a clinical trial screening. So, if people are basically have a genuine condition that requires a treatment, they are offered the opportunity to go into a clinical trial. And now, with the advent of real drugs coming on the scene, drugs that we know are making a difference, that could also be put into place.
A quick pause for anyone interested in joining our DNA testing program in partnership with Fit Genes, a world leading genetics company. So many of you have already joined our Fit Genes community. So now, for anyone who hasn't, it's your turn. Get to know your genes with us. When you know your genes and your unique genetic breaks, you can do something about it. For us here at the Aging Project, we've learned it's the best first step in our aging well journey. If you'd like to learn more, visit theagingproject.com and join the Fit Genes waitlist. We'll send you all the details so you can get started. Can I just duck back to the drop in hormones for one second? Because obviously there seems to be a statistic, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that women are twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's than men. This would perfectly relate to the fact that our estrogen levels drop after menopause. That would make a huge, that just makes sense, doesn't it?
It does make sense, and the amyloid goes up. So definitely, I think this. I believe this is a big factor. Unfortunately, there was some not so good research that came up. So there was another colleague of mine, Professor Sam Gandhi, a very prominent Alzheimer's researcher in the United States, who really led this charge of looking at estrogen in women and the idea of using estrogen replacement therapy that many women have been taking, throughout the world. Uh, but a study was done in much older women who had a lot of other comorbidities, and they were given estrogen that was what they say was, I say, from horse urine, so it wasn't the best estrogen to use,
Mhm.
and it resulted in a negative impact in these women. This we're talking about, I've lost track of time, at least 20 years ago. And as a result of that, many people, doctors got frightened and they didn't want to prescribe it to women. So for a while, many women actually went off their HRT,
Mhm.
and then realized it was an issue, and they got back on again. So what's come out of that is that HRT may not be for everyone.
Mhm.
So women who are much older, maybe not a good idea, but women around perimenopause, it has a benefit. And the fact that we know that estrogen levels regulate amyloid production, I think that's very important. As does the androgen in men.
Mhm. So certainly something to speak to your GP about when you do reach our age. Look, we understand that there are normal signs of aging and that, our
Yes.
bodies are always in decline. And we're doing our best, obviously, to slow that process. What do we know about normal brain aging?
So normal brain aging really is something that's not pathological. So when I show people an image of someone who's got Alzheimer's disease, as opposed to a brain from someone who's the same age but who's working cognitively intact, memory's good, uh, you see a virtually very mild, if any, changes in the structure of the brain. And in the case of Alzheimer's disease, and that's why we say it's a disease, uh, it's there are parts of the brain that are taken out. So the hippocampus to do with memory and learning, and that's one of the first symptoms we see of the disease, is severely damaged and compromised. So with normal brain aging, we might slow down in our responses. We're not so fast at responding, but our knowledge keeps increasing. And we have people who have the sharpest minds right into the 80s in the United States, and it's only now starting to happen in Australia. Professors keep working until they drop. So there was a 90-year-old professor who got the Nobel Prize in medicine, Professor Paul Greengard, who I had the opportunity to be in his lab for a while through Professor Sam Candy, but he was not an exception. There were many like him. So I guess it goes in the category of use it and lose it.
Mhm.
So there are many older people who do not get Alzheimer's disease. Professor Colin Masters, he's 78 now, probably doesn't want me talking about his age, but he's sharp as he ever was, 40 years ago when I knew him. And he's such a major leader. So we've got to be careful about saying because we get older, we're going to get Alzheimer's. But
Yeah.
yes, it's a fact. The older we get past our 60s, the higher the risk.
Mhm.
Uh, so not everybody, but some people, the risk is higher. And a number of people, that risk can be modified, for the better. Uh, and that's what we should be paying more attention to. Unfortunately, in a few, uh, well, I guess a significant number, genetics plays a big role, and we've got to acknowledge that.
Okay.
I have people come up to me and say, "Well, my mom, she ate well, she exercised, she did everything right. She still got Alzheimer's."
Mhm.
And I have personal experiences of that nature too with our own family. So that's where the genes play a big role, and we have to pay more attention to that.
So no one is actually immune, but there are genetic pathways that obviously make you more predisposed to developing Alzheimer's. Let's talk about that. How much is genetics a player in this, and what are the risks?
Yeah, so genetics, there was a gene that was identified uh, in the early 1990s. It was already known to be a gene to do with cholesterol metabolism. So, people had that particular form of the disease. They had hypercholesterolemia, they had heart disease. So, well known, but not for Alzheimer's. And so there was a very prominent researcher, a neurologist, Professor Alan Roses, who identified that link. And he basically, in a way, made a guesstimate. He identified it, within the gene and a region of the gene, and he picked that one when he thought it was the most likely one to be involved in Alzheimer's. It wasn't definitely that one, because there were about 50 other genes there, but it was a good guess he made. And But because it was so out of the box, many of our classical researchers rejected it outright. I was one of the few always who always has an open mind and checked it out. And for Australia, it applied. APOE4, so that's the version that's at high risk, is increased in Alzheimer's disease in Australians. And it accounts for half the people who have Alzheimer's disease carry that gene, APOE4. So it is,
APOE4, and this is something that
yeah,
you can test for with a genetic test.
you, yes, easily test for. It's very easy to. APOE4. It comes in three flavors, a three, a two, and a four. The four is considered a risk factor for Alzheimer's. So if you have a single four, so you get either from mom or dad,
Mhm.
your risk doubles. If you and I want to use the word risk as opposed to causing the disease.
Yes.
If you have two copies, unfortunately, the risk is so high, most people get Alzheimer's. It's relatively rare, but it's there. So E4 is the guy we need to understand better. People always know that what's good for your heart is good for your brain and vice versa.
Mhm.
But we do not really understand how ApoE4 predisposes us to Alzheimer's disease. But I always tell people this. I say, you can't change your genes, but you can change the expression of your genes by what you do. And this is where lifestyle can play a big role.
So 3 different flavors of ApoE. You mentioned ApoE2, ApoE3, and ApoE4.
Oh,
If you
yes.
have 1 or 2 strands of 4, then you're in, I guess, a high risk category, and there are things we'll talk about in a moment being lifestyle factors, et cetera, for that. What are ApoE2 and ApoE3? What are those ones responsible for, or what do they mean? Do they give us
Yeah.
any
So
risk or lower risk?
yeah, much lower. So they're actually all the same protein. They just have subtle changes in them.
Mhm,
So the two or the three, if you think about beads in a chain, say think of 40 beads in a chain, they would have one bead that's substituted, that's different in two, and another one bead is substituted in three. So I'm oversimplifying it, but that's how subtle the change is, but the
mhm,
function makes a big difference. And so ApoE4 is associated with high cholesterol, the other two are not so much, with
mhm,
heart disease. E2, interestingly, is associated with protection against Alzheimer's. And we can come to that uh, there are genes, as opposed to genes that are risk factors like ApoE4, that cause Alzheimer's. So if you have a mutation in these genes, you get the disease and you get it very early, like in your 30s, even in your 20s.
mhm,
And it's because there's an overproduction of this beta amyloid. This is why we believe that beta amyloid is the key player in Alzheimer's.
mhm,
But if you and what people usually do is when they have the disease, say mom has the disease or dad has the disease, and then it's passed on to the children. If mom got it at 45, the children would usually get it close to 45, 43, 46, 47. However, if they carry the ApoE2 gene, there's a degree of protection. They'll get the disease like 10 years later. So
right.
ApoE2 is doing something to help counteract the effect of beta amyloid. We think it's playing a role in clearance, getting rid of the amyloid, whereas ApoE4 plays more of a role in accumulating the amyloid.
This is quite extraordinary because again, it seems like there are so many options available to us that perhaps we didn't know. One being a blood test, one being a scan, and now genetic testing. So this fear around whether or not you will develop Alzheimer's. We're breaking through that, and through your team, and as we mentioned, the teams around the world, we're making some great headway in Alzheimer's.
De- Definitely, Shelley. And uh, genetic tests, like I said, the ones that are like ApoE4 are not causative. We always got to remember that. So people
Yes.
go and get a test and say ApoE4. It's not the end of the world, and it's definitely not that definitely going to get Alzheimer's, because most people who have the E4 don't get Alzheimer's. So they should also remember that. What's going to be the diagnosis of the future? Well, it's almost happening as we speak. Is a blood test for proteins in the blood that reflect amyloid in the brain, and that's going to be the key thing. Because if those proteins are elevated, that means amyloid in the brain is also elevated,
Mhm.
and that's I think is the future.
And
That
that's
we
obviously
all know we are.
a lot easier, a lot cheaper than having a scan itself.
Exactly, and that's been my mission. I want to have a blood test, close to $300 if we can.
Mhm.
I would make it less, but everyone tells me that I'm being too foolish. It's it costs more to do. But just to give you an example, in the United States, the test that people in Australia can go and get, and they're actually doing,
Mhm.
costs $1,500, one single test, and that's ridiculous.
Wow.
So, we want to change. Our biggest challenge is getting sufficient funding to fast track developing the blood diagnostic in Australia.
Over at You Must Try It, we've discovered so many fabulous low tox skin and makeup options. Many of our guests have spoken about reducing our overall toxic load, so that has become a huge priority for me. I've slowly moved to low tox products, and You Must Try It have made it really easy. We only stock low tox products we've tried, tested, and love at youmusttryit.com. So we have done the research for you. If you haven't visited us already, please stop by at youmusttryit.com for 10% off your first order.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, APOE2 tends to play a protective role. It has other complications, but it tends to generally for Alzheimer's, it plays a protective role. 4 is a risk factor. E3 is relatively in between. It's sort of a protein that doesn't put you at high risk. But having said that, half the people who do get Alzheimer's still have the APOE3 gene. So the risk is smaller, but it still doesn't protect you against Alzheimer's. The ApoE genes, particularly ApoE4, is considered the major risk factor. Like I said, it accounts for half the people who get Alzheimer's, so it's definitely huge. There are many other genes that are uh, involved in Alzheimer's, such as the interleukins, such as TNF alpha. The only concern we have about that, and I guess medical testing laboratories have about that, is that some people look at a whole suite of these genes and then try to read something into them. And that's dangerous.
Mhm.
So people need to be very careful about that because they have very small effects in themselves. Uh, the ApoE4 just stands out hugely.
Mhm.
But having said that, they do contribute. Yeah, and so if you have a genetic, uh, we call it a polymorphism because it's not definitely a disease-causing gene, but causes increased risk factor. So TNF alpha again is another gene that expresses the protein to do with inflammation. We know that inflammation is important. So some of the other genes are important, but how powerful their role is in contributing to Alzheimer's is questionable. It's relatively small.
So whether we have them or not, Ralph, what can we do? What sort of lifestyle factors or early interventions can we do to give ourselves the best chance of this amyloid not building up in our brains?
There's a lot we can do, and I think if you look at the Lancet Commission that came out basically early this year, uh, at least 50% of people lifestyle makes a huge difference. At least it'd probably be more than that, and they haven't taken into account conditions like sleep, which is another big issue for Alzheimer's.
Mhm.
Uh, so diet diet really matters. It's a huge thing. And I really had my best collaboration wasn't a scientific one. It was one with Maggie Beer. And I'm sure the
Absolutely,
women that
yes.
listen to you love Maggie Beer. I love her. And I didn't know who she was. When we had gone to Canberra to get our awards, she was a senior Australian of the year. I
Mhm.
was just a West Australian of the year, but that's how I met her. And I actually said to her, I said, Maggie, I said, I published 200 papers and no one reads them. No one in the public knows anything about them. If we were to write a book together, I'm sure we get lots and lots of people reading them,
I love
and that's
this.
what we did. And I spent a fair bit of time. I wrote the first 60 pages, "What's Good for Your Brain," and if anybody wants to get a better understanding of diet, that's the book they should read. Maggie's Recipe for Life. And she made beautiful recipes. And Maggie was not just making those recipes; she interrogated me, she questioned me before she incorporated that into her food. So I reckon she's one of the best scientists I know. But a wonderful, wonderful human being, and probably the best collaborator I've had.
This sounds
So,
like
so
an
diet.
amazing collaboration. So please tell us the name of this book, this recipe book.
It's called Maggie's Recipe for Life.
Mhm.
And we won an award, and I think at that time of about 4 or 5 years ago, we sold 100,000 copies. And what the greatest joy I got of that was when I'd go to conferences, where by say the Lions associations and clubs like that, people would come to me and say, "We've changed our life. Our whole family has changed our eating patterns because of this book." And I find that fantastic. The best kind of reward one could get. So it matters. so so eating well matters. We know that the Mediterranean style diet is particularly good. More fish, vegetables, greens. Uh, you know, less red meat,
Mhm.
but still, you still need your protein, uh, and sweets and salt is what we need to keep cut down. I love my sweets too, and
Yes,
wine
that
in
always makes
moderation.
that's the dagger in my heart. It's like, "Oh, you
Yeah,
can't
yeah,
take that away."
yeah. I understand that, and me too. And but again, with our able study, this the AIBL that I was telling you about. We started with 1,200 people. We now got over 2,000 people that we've been following for the last 14 years plus. And what we found was that people who adhered to the Mediterranean style of diet, their amyloid in the brain was significantly lower. So that was a very good message to us. That's when we first got an idea that lifestyle really was making a significant difference, unless you smoked.
Mhm.
So smoking is definitely a no-no for us to bear in mind.
We should know that by now, right?
Exactly. So it definitely counteracts it. So we need to keep our blood flow as good as possible.
Mhm,
And smoking and I guess bad food, high cholesterol foods, processed foods tend to start blocking our arteries. So what do we do to counteract that? Exercise. So
mhm,
exercise definitely plays a big role. Looking at what we call aerobic exercise, like running, walking fast, uh, as well as weight bearing exercise. So I think everyone's heard about that, but really putting it into practice is important. How much, how frequent, all of those factors are really important factors to consider.
mhm,
And attention to vascular risk factors. And so that's where you want to look at make sure your cholesterol levels low, your blood pressure is under control, those kind of factors, as well as stimulating your mind. Maybe listening to your podcast, people would get stimulated. Anything to stimulate your mind is important. What we're finding is that brain training programs, computerized brain training programs, are really making a difference.
mhm,
But what we hadn't done, and what our colleagues in Finland did for the first time, is they pulled it all together. So they use this technical term multi-domain, that is diet, exercise, brain training, attention to vascular risk factors. And they followed these people uh, with these interventions for a period of 2 years and showed that their cognitive decline was markedly decreased.
mhm,
That's when they're now into their seventh year. And as a result of that work, the world basically started following that plan. And we got one in Australia. We've got what we call the Oz Arrow on target. We got 600 people that we were initially planning to recruit. We've got 500 now that are fully recruited uh, to see whether it applies to Australia. But the same thing's happening in the United States. They've just concluded their study. They have obviously a lot more money again. They've had 2,000 people, and they're going to announce their findings this later this month at the International Alzheimer's Conference. Uh, but there are now 67 countries around the world that are looking at lifestyle because lifestyle plays such a huge factor. Uh,
Well,
uh,
you know what's beautiful is no matter what experts we speak to, the professors around the world, the holistic geniuses, I suppose, that we've been able to have on the show, that we're all saying the same thing. So whether it is for heart
exactly.
disease, Alzheimer's, longevity in general, it's wonderful that the keys are all the same. It's not as if you need to do something completely different to give yourself the best chance of avoiding Alzheimer's. As to heart disease, it's one very clear message that does come down to things that we have the control over, which is also wonderful. It's not having to do anything to a huge expense or to, well, perhaps it is change our lifestyle in a big way, but it seems this is just an overriding factor that we need, that Mediterranean diet, which is, of course, um, your oils, your omegas, and your veggies, your polyphenols. Exercise, that's across the board. Sleep, obviously, a huge one that goes without question. And as you mentioned, that social connection, keeping your brain occupied, but also connecting with other people.
You're spot on. The social connection is very, very important. People talk about dancing, where you have movement, physical activity, you have music, which is also very important, and you have that social engagement. So social engagement is really amazing. We're actually doing something as my side hat. I'm part of the Rotary Club of Freshwater Bay in Perth, where we had what we call the Vitality Club, where basically it was healthy aging and promoting socialization, but also giving them information and engagement. And we had over 100 people attend the first time. It was a very short notice, and people were left on the waiting list. And so it was good that people are keen to really make a difference and change their lifestyle and learn about things and be stimulated and socially engaged, which is very important. We had a juggler, he was talking about brain plasticity, and it just sounds so simple, just juggling a few balls, but then we juggle four, five, six. And your brain is working at managing how you do that. So it's simple things like that, but brain plasticity is very important. And so the more we do, it will really effectively combat and delay the onset of Alzheimer's. So the drugs are there. We know the anti-amyloid drugs are there. They're disease-modifying drugs. They clean the brain of amyloid. They buy you an extra 3 years if you're in the early stages of symptoms, but you need more. And this is where lifestyle is going to really fill that gap. All parts of our body are affected by what we do. Unfortunately, the really smart people in this world in Alzheimer's thought it was just restricted to the brain. So lifestyle was something my team did in Western Australia, and I keep reminding everybody about that because they were not interested in the L of Abel. Uh, so we we looked at weight gain in people, and we're not the only ones who published it because there was another group in the United States did the same thing, and we found the more body fat someone had, the higher the amyloid in the blood.
Mhm.
So this was well before blood tests were the norm. So that showed there's a very strong interaction. And there's also a very strong interaction between weight gain, type 2 diabetes. Everyone knows about that, and Alzheimer's. So type 2 diabetes is also a risk factor for Alzheimer's. So bringing our weight down to a healthy level is important, even though some people find it a bit sensitive. I think it's something we got to pay attention to. I carried a lot of weight, in my 40s, uh, and I had uh, a serious heart problems. So I think I'm lucky I'm alive and I'm talking to you guys thanks to the wonderful cardiologist I had at the time. But I'm very careful about what I eat, and it took me, even with all my knowledge and understanding, it took me, I think, 30 years or 40 years to really get it right, eating healthy food. But sleep is a huge factor. And sleep apnea definitely needs to be tested because it's not only associated with brain health, also associated with heart health,
Mhm.
for heart health. So that's something that's now available. So there are memory clinics that are doing it. There are centers, sleep centers throughout Australia that are doing it. So in Sydney, my collaborator, Professor Sharon Naismith, is leading a major sleep center of excellence, and they're screening for sleep apnea. The same thing at Macquarie University. She's at University of Sydney and Macquarie University. Uh, uh, Similar work has been undertaken by very prominent sleep researchers to see what impact sleep apnea has, and definitely it plays a big role. But there are other poor sleep is also a factor.
Mhm.
What the Lancet Commission hasn't done, because not enough evidence has been provided yet, is that they didn't include sleep. But sleep is one of the biggest pillars to do with brain health. And what happens when we sleep well? Uh, you know, we we get the garbage disposal machines to come out and clear the amyloid out of our brain. When we sleep poorly, we get a significant buildup. Even like 2 days bad sleep can impact on the buildup of amyloid. So sleep is very important. And so there are people now uh, in Sydney. My colleague, Professor Sharon Naismith, and other colleagues are undertaking clinical trials to look at agents that can promote sleep,
Mhm.
which are safe. There are sleeping medications that are not good for your health. That's becoming very clear for your
Mhm.
brain health.
Mhm.
The ones that make you dopey, but there are a couple that are looking very promising. In particular, the natural hormone melatonin. Uh, it is seeming to have a benefit, and it's safe. But they're looking at higher doses of melatonin to get you really good sleep.
Mhm.
Uh, and when we talk about sleep too, it's our quality of sleep. It's not having 8 hours of sleep a day. It could differ between individual to individual. If you have a 6 hours of sound sleep, that's sufficient. Uh, uh, so, and in Sydney, and I'm sure throughout the country, people are offering sleep studies. If you're concerned about your sleep, go and join the sleep center. So in Perth, Professor Stephanie Rainey Smith is running a sleep study at the Alzheimer's Research Australia, and she's looking at cognitive behavior therapy as opposed to drugs
Mhm.
to give yourself a good sleep, getting good sleep hygiene, and etc. So definitely, we need to treat sleep very seriously as we get older.
And
The
there's
other
obviously those, as you say, those extremes in that, but once you get your diet in line and your exercise is coming together, and it won't happen overnight, but slowly and surely, all of those things are going to contribute to a better night's sleep as well. Obviously, not drinking is a big one for us that we
definitely,
know we're all going to have to keep working on, like cutting out desserts. It's just something that we have to commit to and do. But if we're slowly doing all those things, and obviously, as you've explained to us, there is a lot of help around the country for targeting professional help for sleep.
definitely, and you're right, they're so interrelated. Um, uh, we, uh, we talk about gut health. Gut health in Alzheimer's is still in its infancy.
Mhm.
So if you were to talk to some of the prominent people in Alzheimer's, and I won't mention the name, he was my mentor, he says rubbish, like they said about lifestyle, 20 years ago. But in my lab, we are doing it. So we have Dr. Benocia Fernando, who's doing some excellent work on gut health and Alzheimer's, and is showing there's a change in the type of the bad bacteria in the gut with people at risk of Alzheimer's. So there's very strong links over there, and they all intertwine. And when you have that bad gut health, it impacts on your sleep. So and if post sleep results in your insulin levels being affected, so you have high risk of insulin resistance. Uh, so really, it's a vicious cycle,
Mm.
and by targeting it, by improving each aspect of it of your lifestyle, will really impact. Alcohol is a difficult one, and I think I shouldn't be speaking about it because I like my alcohol. Well, my colleagues, I've had a colleague when I presented at a conference together when he said, really, no alcohol is best. I find it very hard to accept. I know that drinking too much alcohol is definitely a no-no, but alcohol in moderation, 1 or 2 glasses of wine is not bad. And I think that if you look at some of the data over the years, uh, there is this basically this peak where you see you get a best benefit when you have moderate amount of alcohol. And maybe red wine would be better. I know some of us like a white wine, but red wine's got more antioxidants in it, so that counteracts any negative impact. But alcohol is something that's up there. Uh, Not as bad as smoking. Smoking is a really real absolute no-no. But alcohol in low doses is fine. Maybe
Okay,
we should
so
go for the de-alkalized wine, alkalized wine, but I'm not that. Doesn't excite me.
you're
So
you're saying the antioxidants in red wine are going to help with that oxidization in the brain. Can't be too bad a thing in moderation, Professor
in
Ralph.
moderation. So you're right. I mean, so in the 80s, we found amyloid. And like I said, I've got to attribute that to Professor Colin Masters because it was his vision and his leadership that allowed us to find the amyloid. But we also reported on oxidative stress in the brain, and that was my finding. And there was a time when no one thought much of it. They actually dismissed it, 40 odd years ago, and now everybody says it's one of the key features of Alzheimer's disease, oxidative stress. And what it means is, I mean, I make a very simplistic example is if someone bites an apple, exposes it to the air, it goes brown. It shows that it's got oxidized, and that's what's
Mhm,
happening in the brain. So as we get older, and this fits with your question about aging and the risk of Alzheimer's, our ability to counteract the effects of oxidation is decreased,
mhm,
and so oxidative stress does more damage. So getting antioxidants into the brain is going to be very important, and we haven't succeeded there yet. So I think eating good diets is good. We're getting something in there,
mhm,
but as a drug or as a treatment, we still are working on it. One of the compounds that I really believe has a very strong effect is curcumin, the curry
mhm,
spice curcumin.
mhm.
And if you read the book, you mentioned all the other good stuff about food, but herbs and spices are also very important to consider. And that's what we've also got in Maggie's Recipe for Life. Uh, so curcumin is a powerful antioxidant and a powerful anti-inflammatory agent.
Mhm.
So it's really good. And in some parts of the world, in some parts of India and in Singapore, they found that people who consume uh, a lot of curries have a low incidence of Alzheimer's. But we've done clinical trials in Australia. We've done one in Perth at the Alzheimer's Research Australia and one at Macquarie in Sydney, and found that we did not see an actual benefit of curcumin on the brain. People would come and say, my mom's knee joint pain is great. Now it's gone. So we've cured everything below the neck, but not
Mm.
above it. And what's turning out to be the case is that curcumin uh, uh, cannot get through the blood-brain barrier so easily. So we have a blood-brain barrier that keeps most things out to protect us, but also can keep good things out. And so what my team are doing now is we're trying to deliver it intranasally. So a bit like a sniff it kind of.
Mhm, mhm,
And my colleague, Dr. Preeta Asi, she did an animal study in mice who genetically basically are designed to get Alzheimer's and showed that their memory actually improved by delivering it through the nose. So we're now trying to develop it, our team trying to develop it into a treatment for in humans. But we've got a way to go to get it out there because
incredible.
that might be a simple, cheap way of getting a powerful antioxidant into the brain.
It's just fascinating how broad the approach to Alzheimer's and dementia is. You know, everything, as you say, from what we're eating to how we're exercising to brain scans. It seems there's this, this very, very broad attack on solving this problem that is
Exactly.
Alzheimer's, this epidemic really that is Alzheimer's. If we're making all these lifestyle changes, Ralph, and we're doing the right things, and even if we are a high risk individual with that APOE4, what sort of numbers are we talking? If we're really, I guess, constricting our lifestyle to do all the right things, is it making a huge difference? Are there percentages that we can talk here?
So we haven't implemented that yet. I mean, so we've got to see. I think it's going to be a huge difference. If we go to the other side of the coin, if we do nothing, at the
Mm,
rate we are going, in about 20 years, 25 years, 20 years, we're going to have over 1 million Australians. That's huge. With Alzheimer's and probably and dementia and probably just as many on the way there.
mhm,
Uh, I honestly believe that if we can really implement the lifestyle, and this is why, this trial that I'm doing to looking at lifestyle prevention of Alzheimer's, I want to now have that take the next step to implement it into the wilder community.
mhm,
We need government support, and this is what's not happening yet. That would have a huge. I reckon it would halve it. It may make it even to as much as 60% would be reduced. That's my take on it. We've got to do the work to really demonstrate it, but I'm quite convinced that's the case. And like you said, not only would it would help our brains, it'll help the rest of our bodies, our
mhm,
heart, you know, our pancreas,
mhm,
So it would have a huge benefit, and it's a bit short-sighted if governments are not going to look at implementing this. It's better than going the pharmaceutical approach
mm,
because they're very targeted and they're good and they have a role. But I think this
mm.
would be the better way for our community.
So, Professor, you're saying that the numbers of people with Alzheimer's is going to double very, very shortly, in a very short space of time here in Australia. Is that because of the way that we live, particularly? Is it our genetic makeup here in Australia? What is it that is doubling, or is it just the ageing population in general?
It's a combination of those things, and it's not just us. When I mentioned these facts, Canada, United States, Europe, uh, and Asian countries are now starting to catch up. Japan went over the top. They're what we call the super aging country of the lot, because Japan was more modernized compared to the other Asian countries. So it's definitely a reflection of our advancement as a country in many other ways, but we've also taken on many of these commercialized food preparations um, that really are having a negative impact. So, what we do is impacting. We see that with people with type 2 diabetes. We see with children getting type 2 diabetes in Australia. You know, we see that with increasing obesity. That's increasing. So all those things are coming into play. to then lead to a risk of Alzheimer's disease. And unfortunately, we have to accept we are living longer. So there'll be more older people coming in. And like I said, the older we are, the higher the risk. So while many of us will still get through and live healthy lives, a number of us will be more prone to getting it. And if you go to 85 plus, as much as 50% are at risk of getting dementia. So it's a big factor. So these are multiple factors that need to pay attention to. And I guess if we can control diabetes, if you can control obesity, and those have been on the rise, then we get a better impact. Countries where there's very little industrialization, you know, what we call the countries who are less progressive than the rest of us, have the lowest incidence of dementia. And when those individuals come from those countries to United States of America, they get Alzheimer's disease and they get it early. So it just shows that the lifestyle factors
Mm.
are playing a big role in the risk of Alzheimer's and other diseases.
Professor, for someone who has been deep down this rabbit hole for 40 years plus, what do you do to prioritize your own brain health? Is there, a list of 5 things that we should all be implementing as of after this conversation that you follow that you think will make a huge difference?
I think eating well, healthily well, is everything. It is all very important, and that's what I've started to do. And in my case, I take one of those foods that are delivered to you, uh, but they're very nutritious. They take all the things that Maggie would be proud of in the food, lots of vegetables. And I'm one of those people, I guess, because I was brought up in boarding school where food was tasted terrible, particularly vegetables. I used to avoid vegetables. I just couldn't take vegetables. And now with these foods, I can consume them and enjoy them. And I remember Maggie's words to me, you know, it's got to be, it's got to be delicious. You've got to, flavor, flavor, flavor was her mantra, and that's stuck in my brain. And so yes, so that's something that I've done, but it took me 45 years to reach that point to do it, and I feel better for it. And it's really great. Uh, I uh, I do a bit of exercise, and that's something I've got to work on. I
Mhm.
need to do more. I need to do it much more regularly, at least 3 times a week. So it's something that I probably give myself a cross as opposed to a tick, but it's something that needs to be definitely done. Uh, and I take some supplements, but I'm not into supplements in a big way.
Mhm.
I do take multivitamin every day to compensate for maybe if I haven't eaten so well. I have fish oil. So, people who can't have fish 3 times a day, maybe fish oil is not a bad idea to have. It doesn't cause any harm. I take a bit of zinc. So, and magnesium. Magnesium is also being linked to be good for sleep. Some people claim it's good for cognition, and we're actually considering doing a clinical trial, but definitely good for sleep. And then the two are interlinked. If you have a good sleep, you're fresher, your memory's better.
Mhm.
So that's what I do in terms of my lifestyle plans. And like you said, social engagement is important. I think I'm doing a lot more of that. In my early career, I was so caught up in my work, and I still love my work. I'm very passionate about it, but I take the time to be spending much more time with family. And I enjoy my grandchild, which is one of the best gifts I was ever given.
That's it. That's time to focus on that right now, isn't it? Back to the supplements.
Exactly.
We hear a lot, again, for women around perimenopause, menopause, about creatine. Do you have any comments on creatine at all?
I have got no personal experience with it. I've heard that it's useful. I'm very wary about a lot of the products that are out there. So
Mhm.
I'm not the best person to speak to about products because I think it's so important that they have clinical trials. And
Mhm.
I would say to anybody, if you're going to look at something, including creatine, have a look and see what clinical trials have been done.
Mhm.
Uh, and if they look to be positive, then I'd support that as a general rule of thumb. Older people, especially those in nursing homes, for example, don't get enough water to drink. They don't want to drink, and people they need to be given drink water regularly. So water is critical. And many of us tend to be dehydrated. I know it's not the younger people; they have a huge big bottle of water they take wherever they go, and that's lovely to see. But I think as older people are not consuming as much water, and it puts one at a high risk of stroke too, being dehydrated, among other things. So yes, water is important. Did no research on water, but I know for a fact that it is important.
We've heard so much incredible information today, Professor. This conversation, I know, is going to be life-changing for a lot of people, and certainly to reduce that worry that so many people feel about the fact that they don't know where to turn, and they don't really know if there was anything that they could do to reduce their chances of developing Alzheimer's as they get older. So we thank you so much for your time today and for the information that you've been able to give. And I guess that little bit of peace of mind that we're all going to take now that there is things that we can do. Is there a favorite quote, I guess, or piece of advice that you'd like to share with our listeners? And it can be from your time with Maggie Beer, that is fine also, but we know that you've mentioned some incredible names in science today, and we'll certainly have
Yes.
links to all that information in our show notes. But something from you that you could advise all of our listeners to do.
So I would say that good food matters. And that's why I'd recommend your listeners to really check out Maggie's Recipe for Life. It's online. You can check out the book because it really I went to a lot of trouble putting all the details of what's good for your brain, but also what's not so good for your brain. And we had lovely charts there to show what processed foods, for example. Uh, the other second major message I'd like to give your listeners is early diagnosis is critical. So if you're genuinely concerned about your memory, don't wait 1 year, 2 year till you think you're going to get worse. Do it as soon as possible. Get to your GP and basically urge your GP to refer you to a specialist. Because I think that is critical to get, because the disease modifying drugs are here, but they're going to be most effective the earlier the intervention starts. So get in early.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. As always, the Aging Project podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes. Always seek medical advice from a qualified practitioner.